Hello and welcome. My name is Bobby Keefe, and today I'm going to be comparing performance between two Lian Li CPU coolers, the GA II Lite 360 RGB and the GA II Lite 360 Performance all-in-one 360 millimeter CPU coolers. A few months ago, I had picked up this GA II Lite 360 RGB model for my Intel Core Ultra 7 270K build, and I was just blown away at the performance that it offered, especially for its price. Um, this cooler was able to do about 30 watts better, cool about 30 watts more than the 360 millimeter all-in-one that I was using on my Intel Core Ultra systems. And so this kind of got the wheels in my head spinning. I have this other system I had also been running, the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X, and I started to wonder how much performance that the CPU cooler I was using on this was leaving on the table. So I went back to the store to get another Lian Li GA II Lite, and I saw that they had this performance model. Now, if you just look at the box, you can see there's a clear difference. One is this one has RGB lighting on the fans, and this one does not. Now, I don't particularly care for RGB lighting. I don't even leave it on most of the time. What I care about is how good the cooler can actually cool the CPU. So I purchased this performance model. It was about, $10 or so more than the RGB model. And to me, if it was going to offer better performance than the RGB model that I already really liked, that was worth it to me. Now, when I got home, I went on Lian Li's website and I did the research I probably should have done before going to the store and found out that the performance difference between these two is a little bit more nuanced. So both of these units share the same CPU pump that you can see here. They both look identical. They are identical. They're exactly the same. And they also share the radiator, which is above the fans. So essentially the core components of this pump, of this cooling system, are the pump, which moves the liquid, and the radiator, which actually allows the liquid to be cooled, were identical. The only difference was the fans. And the difference was a little bit more nuanced than just lighting and no lighting. So, according to Lian Li specs, the RGB fans are actually capable of moving slightly more airflow. I think it was about 7% more airflow than the performance model, but they also run a little bit noisier. Now, I don't particularly care if it makes noise or not. I don't run these in sound sensitive environments. As I stated before, what I ultimately care about is how well it performs. So I was a little bit disappointed to find this out because I was like, okay, well, if the RGB fans are going to move more air, which in theory should cool better, I wish I got the RGB model. So I set out to make this video to basically answer myself and share with you guys what is the actual performance difference between these two models. Now, um, I want to talk a little bit about my testing methodology before I get into the results because that's important. So whenever you're installing a CPU cooler, there can be slight variations in how the cooler actually installs to the motherboard and the CPU. There's a paste you use between the CPU cooler and the CPU called thermal paste, and it can sit slightly different ways each time you install the CPU cooler, which can create slightly different results. So to get rid of that effect, I did not actually change or uninstall the pump heads uh, between testing these. I simply just changed the fans since the pump heads are identical anyway. This should minimize any difference between installation between these two systems and really just reflect the fan performance itself. Um, in addition, there's also kind of two trains of thoughts when you're testing CPU coolers. And the first is that you should leave it installed in the case as it runs, because that's a true indication of how this cooler performs inside the case when you're going to be actually using it. And the other is you take the radiator and fans out of the case and let them get as much free air as possible. And this is a test of the true performance of the radiator and fan system. I chose a middle ground approach, was to leave both of these installed in the cases. However, I uh, I took off the side panel just like you see here. So basically air was free to get into the system and hot air was not trapped inside the case. And I also removed the top covers of both these cases. Now, both top covers not only are going to restrict air slightly, but they had dust filters to prevent dust getting in the system, which would prevent airflow even more. So I removed the top cover, I removed the dust flow. So even though these were both installed in the case when I tested them, they should have really been able to get as much airflow as possible outside of the actual case material on top of the case. So, that being said, there is one note I wanted to add about the results, and that was that I will not be doing sound testing, accurate sound testing. I don't have the environment or equipment to tell you how many decibels one of these fans is running versus the other, but I will be including video so you can decide for yourself. And I will also be including my own opinion of what I experienced when using both of these. So let's go ahead and look at these results. So before we take a look at performance and noise levels for ourselves, let's see what Lian Li has to say about these two models. So for the RGB model, they say that it has a higher maximum static pressure and a higher maximum airflow. However, it also has a higher fan noise. Whereas the performance version, they state is focused on silent high airflow fans, and in their own numbers, it moves less air, but it also generates 5 decibels lower sound. And for the full specifications of both these models, we can see that everything is identical and shared with the exception of the fans. And as I already stated, we're going to be testing the Intel Core Ultra 7 270K Plus, which was overclocked, in the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X, which was also overclocked. The reason that I overclocked them for this testing was because when you overclock, the processors run faster than their stock settings, but as a consequence, they use more power, and that causes them to generate more heat, which means they'll be more difficult to cool, and this should really be a good stress test for these coolers. Both systems were running MSI Tomahawk motherboards, 64 gigabytes of RAM, Windows 11 Professional, and in both BIOSes, the pump and fan speeds were set to 100%. For testing methodology, I used HWInfo64 to read the temperature and power usage. The workload that was running was Cinebench R23, specifically the CPU multi-core 10-minute test. This is a great test to just use 100% of the possible processing power of each processor. It really stresses them, really pushes them. So I ran it 4 times, so it's 4 10-minute runs, and I ignored the first run and averaged the last 3 runs. And the reason I did this is because the first run, the pump and radiator would have been cool because the system had not warmed up yet, so I didn't want to use these results. So if we look at the AMD Ryzen 9 9950X, we can see that with the performance cooler, the processor was able to pull about half a watt higher than the RGB model. However, this is almost no difference. And as far as temperatures go, we can see that the performance model had a higher max temperature reading during the test, which means at some point the processor got slightly warmer, but the average reading throughout the test was actually slightly lower than the RGB model. However, again, both models were virtually indistinguishable. And we have a similar story with the Core Ultra 7 270K Plus by Intel. We can see that with the performance model, it was able to pull more power. However, very little difference on, especially on average power, about 3 watt difference there. And if we look at temperatures, despite pulling more power, the performance model does actually outperform the RGB model. However, it's by less than 1 degree Celsius. So again, both models are virtually the same. Now we're going to look at the actual fan noise, and I'm going to show you some videos of the fans actually running. But before we do that, I just wanted to, real quick, just in your mind as a reference, the performance model fans are black, and the RGB models are whitish. But the performance model fans do have a little bit more rubber here where they attach to the radiator. This is just to help minimize vibration more. However, I didn't notice any vibration with either of the models. Okay, now before we go ahead and look at the videos of the two fans running, I just wanted to preface it by saying I don't know if the videos accurately capture the noise level difference between the two fans, and just in complete transparency, overall noise sounded very similar to me. What was the differentiating factor, and what I think you should focus on when you see the videos, is the RGB fans had a different pitch than the performance fans. And so when you go ahead and just watch that, just keep that in mind. That don't focus on overall volume. Focus more on the pitch of the fans, because in my real life experience, that's what was noticeable to me. All right, now that we've watched the videos on the fans running, I hope it came through pretty clear that the RGB fans operate at a slightly higher pitch than the performance fans. Um, in person, the loudness to me was about the same. When I walked into a room and I was running a workload, the test leads, I could hear both of them running, and one didn't sound significantly louder or significantly quiet than the other. It's just that the RGB fans have a slightly higher pitch to them when running. And to be honest, if you're very noise conscious, if you're going to be running these in a quieter environment, there's all-in-one coolers that cater more toward noise. I would say these are excellent coolers for price and performance. I also wanted to add that I was testing these on pretty high-end consumer processors, the AMD Ryzen 990 950X and the Intel Core Ultra 7 270K Plus, and I was also pushing them. So they were both consuming well over 200 watts, which is a bit extreme for your typical desktop processor. And these coolers shouldn't need to run their fans at 100% max speed unless you're pushing them like I was today, which means that the fan noise should be even quieter under typical usage scenarios. And now that we've looked at the results and analyzed them, I think I'm pretty satisfied with the GA II Lite 360 performance purchase. I was a little on the fence when I saw the specs on paper, that the RGB fans should have been able to move a little bit more air, and worried that I was leaving performance on the table. But the performance actually held its own, and it does have the benefit of the fans are slightly have a slightly lower pitch to them. That being said, if you care about RGB, the 360 RGB they're great for that. And also, I typically seem to see a little bit better deals on the RGB model. So yeah, if that's what it is, that's what it is. The price, it's hard to beat the price on that. So yeah, thanks for watching. If you have any questions about anything, just let me know. And I don't know how much CPU coolers reviews I'll be doing, unless AMD and Intel's next generation processors are both being talked about using more power than this generation. So if that's true, maybe I'll have to revisit these down the line. But for now, I'm pretty satisfied with both these units, and I have no problem recommending them for your system. Thanks for watching.